Hey, what's up? This is Jeremy Popoff from the band Lit. You're listening to Fascination Street.
I believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear them. So come with me as we take a walk down Fascination Street. Welcome back, Streetwalkers. This episode is with Tripp Mickle, the author of the new book, After Steve, How Apple Became a $1 trillion company and Lost Its Soul. In this episode, we talk about what got Tripp into journalism and why he felt the need to write this book. And then we talk all about the book. We talk about the ups and downs of Apple. We talk about how important some of these central characters were, like Jony Ive and Tim Cook, of course. Those are the two central characters in this story. We talk about some of the innovativeness, and we talk about some of the things that understandably make raving fans of customers. And we also talk about some of the things that make people kind of eschew the brand. This is a fantastic book. There is a giveaway of this book at the end of the episode, so make sure you tune in for that. And this is my conversation with Tripp Mickle, author of the new book, After Steve, How Apple Became a $1 trillion company and Lost Its Soul.
Yeah, talk to me, yeah.
Welcome to Fascination Street Podcast, Tripp Mickle. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Tripp Mickle. He is the author of the new book, After Steve, How Apple Became a $1 trillion company and Lost Its Soul. Full disclosure, your people did send me this book, but I did not read this book. That's crazy, right? So here's what I did. My job, my everyday job, has me on a ladder every day, so I can't really hold a book. So what I did was I bought the audiobook and I had it read to me. And so if it's okay with you, since I have this pristine, unmolested copy of your book, I'd like to give it away at the end of the show, if that's okay with you.
Please do, by all means. That's great. Yeah, how'd you like Will Dameron's reading of the book?
I thought he was great. I guess he's a professional at it. He's done a few, but some of the words that he said, his pronunciation just cracked me up. I can't remember any of them right now, but they did make me laugh when I was listening. I was like, what the hell is he? Oh, that's the word he meant. So I'm sure that's just me being a hillbilly from Texas. And he probably said it all correctly, but it was really cool, and I enjoyed the shit out of it. So what I like to do, Tripp, is I like to help us get to know the guests by understanding a little bit about their background. And the way we do that is like this. Hey, man, where were you born and raised? Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina. Came from a family from Charlotte. So, Charlotte's one of those cities across the Sun Belt that has gotten much, much bigger over the years. But my family is native North Carolinians and native Charlotteans.
So how many generations of North Carolina persons are you?
Fourth generation Charlottean, roughly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So was your family back in the olden days into tobacco or farming or any of that nature?
No, not tobacco. I had a great grandfather who was, worked downtown in Charlotte. I can't even remember what he did, which sounds idiotic. And then another grandfather who grew up as the son of a postal worker in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And so those are the two sides of my family.
Gotcha. Chapel Hill, there's a college there, right?
Yeah, UNC Chapel Hill. Yeah, where Michael Jordan played ball.
Who? What's his name? So, are you still living in North Carolina now?
No, I've lived in San Francisco for the past 6 years. I moved out here to begin covering Apple, initially for the Wall Street Journal and now for the New York Times.
So you're a journalist. Was that your major in college?
I majored in English, which means you either become a lawyer or, I don't know, wing it into some career or become a teacher or something like that. And I always wanted to be a journalist. So I used my background in literature to move into the journalism world.
Why didn't you major in journalism?
They don't have a major at Wake Forest for journalism. They only have a minor. It's it's a liberal arts school. It prides itself on that well-rounded education and indoctrinating people in the humanities. And so a professional school like journalism or a professional line of study like journalism was not something that they taught.
Gotcha. So you always wanted to be a journalist?
Yeah, since like fifth grade.
Why?
To be quite honest, I was lucky to have a teacher in fifth grade who did this quirky thing where she gave ribbons to students at the end of the year that said future whatever. She tried to predict what you would be later in life. And some of them were jokey. I had a friend who used to draw on himself on class, and he got future tattoo artist.
That makes sense.
He now runs a bar in Charlotte, I believe, which I guess is kind of like tattoo ancillary.
Is he covered in tattoos?
No, he's not. I was really into current events and really enjoyed writing. And so she gave me future editor at the New York Times. And so that kind of put me on this trajectory towards leaning into those things that I was already passionate about and delving into this career that has been a blast so far. I've gotten to write about a lot of fun things.
And that was in fifth grade?
Yep.
So when I was in fourth grade, my English teacher, Miss Humensky, total bitch. Every week, every Friday, we had to get a newspaper article. A newspaper, kids, just kidding. We had to get a newspaper article and then, like a current event newspaper article. And then we had to write, sort of a report on that event or whatever. And I was all cool and enjoying doing this as an exercise every week until, for whatever reason, I don't know why. I don't know if I chose the skirt event or if it was chosen for me, but it was when Michael Jackson was filming a Pepsi commercial and his hair caught on fire. And it was so horrific to me because he was my hero. He was like the greatest thing ever. I wasn't the only one. He was 100 million people loved him, but I was just so horrified by some of the details that were in these articles that I was just like, maybe I don't want to be a dude, I don't want to do this anymore. So I'm glad that you had a better experience.
Yeah, it worked out well for me. I guess, did you stop reading the newspaper after that? Or was it just merely, that's not what you're...
Tripp, I'm going to be honest. Everybody stopped reading the newspaper after that. Yeah, I kind of did. I mean, I was a fourth grader anyway, so I had no business reading the newspaper. But yeah, I was kind of done from there, man. I'm like, no news. I'm cool. I don't need to hear anything else. Were you on the school newspaper or anything like that?
I did the high school newspaper. I did the college newspaper, and interned at a local newspaper outside of Charlotte called the Gaston Gazette. My first story, it was kind of funny. Gastonia is a little rural. It's only about 30 minutes outside of Charlotte. And the first story I got dispatched on was my editor was driving into work and he passed a cornfield where he saw, instead of scarecrows in the field, the farmer had set up cardboard cutouts of swimsuit models. And so he sent me out there to go and interview the farmer about why he put out the scarecrows. And that was like the centerpiece of the metro of the local section the following day.
Did you also have a chance to find out what his wife thought of that?
I did not. I was early in my days of doing interviews. I probably should have made sure to speak to the wife, the sister, everybody else around.
I might have only talked to the wife. That is hilarious. I know that you used to write for the Wall Street Journal. Mm-hmm. How did that come about?
A stroke of good fortune in a way. I was writing for a magazine called Sports Business Journal. I was covering the Olympics for them.
What year? Which Olympics?
My first games was Beijing, and then my last was Sochi. So I did Beijing and London on the summer side, and then Vancouver and Sochi on the winter side. And the Wall Street Journal, in its Atlanta bureau, which it had at the time, had an opening to cover alcohol and tobacco out of that office. I was also covering NASCAR, I should mention, for Sports Business Journal. And so I applied. NASCAR was built by the tobacco industry, as many people may or may not know. And as a stroke of good luck, the woman who was hiring for the position, her husband used to write about sports business for the Wall Street Journal. So he was familiar with my writing and my work, and I was able to land that job. And so that's how I landed at the Wall Street Journal, and got to write about bourbon shortages for a couple of years and kind of the rise of microbreweries, which, now is like, all the rage, but was really bubbling up around that time.
Did you get to pick your own stories, or did some editor tell you, hey, this is what I want you to write about?
I mean, the job of a journalist is I mean, you're as good as your ideas, so that's probably 2/3 of what you should be doing, and then the other third is made up of sometimes a story assignment, and then sometimes just breaking news. I mean, when I was writing about the beer business, Anheuser-Busch InBev acquired SAB Miller, so for the better part of a year, I was writing about all the consequences of that action. So, I mean, they were my story ideas, but they were really dictated by what was going on in the news at large.
Did you say S.A. InBev?
Yes.
Is that Stella Artois?
Yeah, SAB Miller. And Stella, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
As well as Budweiser and a bunch of other brands.
Yeah, I feel like it was kind of a big deal when that all happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why did you leave the Wall Street Journal?
There's an opportunity to do something different. I think that appealed to me, just to try a different place and learn a different way of doing things. Weirdly, I spent 8 years at Sports Business Journal, and then I went to the Wall Street Journal and went through a period of tremendous professional growth, and then spent 8 years at the Wall Street Journal just about, and this opportunity presented itself, and I wanted to try something new.
Is the opportunity we're talking about this book after Steve?
No, I'm at the New York Times now. So I've
snap, son.
Yeah. So I moved on to the Times in April of this year.
Okay, so you're currently at the Times. Now, let me ask you this stupid question. Does being an employee for the Times prohibit you from your book being a New York Times bestseller? Like, is there a conflict of interest there?
Not at all. Nor does it prohibit them from reviewing your book or anything like that. I was in a kind of a weird in-between place because I did the book while I was at the Wall Street Journal and then joined the Times as the book was being published.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
You said an opportunity presented itself for you to go to the New York Times. What was that opportunity?
They just had an opening to cover Apple.
Oh, it was specifically to cover Apple?
Yeah, I was covering Google for the Wall Street Journal at the time, and this opportunity became available and seemed like it made sense to take it.
So you're working for the Wall Street Journal, covering Google, writing a book about Apple, and then an opportunity to cover Apple for the New York Times presents itself?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
That's pretty fortuitous, my friend.
Yeah, it's funny, we'll be talking about Tim Cook, I'm sure, later, but he has a philosophy around your career where, around, I guess, career development. He's talked about this a lot at commencement addresses, where the best thing you can do is work hard and prepare yourself and then take advantage of opportunities as they present themselves. And I've been really fortunate in that regard. I mean, my whole career has just been, in many ways, just accidental connections that have opened a door to a new job, to be quite honest.
Well, along the lines of that preparedness, I mean, you never know when something like this is going to happen, obviously. But, just like that door opened for you, a long time ago, there was a band called Judas Priest. They're probably still around. Mm-hmm. And they were looking for a new singer. Well, they had a huge fan, big fan, who knew all their songs, sang all their songs. He might have even been in a Judas Priest cover band. I'm not even sure about that. But that opportunity fell into his lap and he won the job. His name was Ripper Owens, and they made a Mark Wahlberg movie about it. Lesson to everybody listening, whatever it is that you're passionate about, be knowledgeable and be open, because like Tripp said, I mean, that is the most random opportunity window I've ever heard open in real life from the mouth of a bird. Like, that is amazing. So I'm glad that you were ready for it when it presented itself. And it turns out you're really good at it. Once again, the book is called After Steve: How Apple Became a $1 trillion company and Lost Its Soul. Before we get into the book, I would have a question, since you're a journalist who writes books and works for the New York Times. When and why did books start having 37 words in the title?
I think in nonfiction books, you see more subtitles to help broaden.
But when did that start?
I don't know.
Like, I don't remember that growing up.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean,
like, I'm surrounded by books right here, and all of the titles are paragraphs.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe it started in the 90s. I was trying to think. I'm like looking over here at some of the books on my shelf, and Boys in the Boat, I don't think has a subtitle, but even this David Halberstam book on Michael Jordan playing for keeps, it's Michael Jordan and the World He Made. I just think that's been a tick of nonfiction books for quite a long time. I just don't know if in the world of business nonfiction, if like Den of Thieves had that, or Barbarians at the Gate. I mean, obviously these are books you just remember by their title alone, not the subtitle.
Right. Okay, well, that's a good point. But boy, is that frustrating. That's a whole lot of words to have to say, not you in particular, just in general.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose if it were just After Steve, somebody passing it by on a shelf, guessing as to which Steve. Yeah. Are we talking about Steve Owens and Fascination Street? Or are we talking about Steve Jobs and Apple? And
those two get confused all the time.
Yeah, you at least wanted to, or at least wanted to be sure that people knew what the subject matter of the book would be. Because the two guys photographed on the front aren't easily recognizable to everyone. And so you do need people to come into it with some awareness.
So the guy with the glasses, is that Tim Cook?
That's Tim Cook, yeah.
And then the other guy, is that Jony?
That's Jony Ive, yeah.
Okay. I could be sitting next to them at a Starbucks and I would have no idea.
Yeah.
So you're correct about that. Real quick, just to go back to your coverage of the Olympics. You said the Winter Olympics in Vancouver and Sochi?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, although those were weird Winter Olympics because I think they both were incredibly tropical. It was like 70 degrees in both places throughout the games. So
a previous guest on my show is four-time Olympic Jamaican bobsledder who competed in both of those Olympics. In the Sochi one, he might have been the oldest Olympian at the games. He was like 50 or some shit like that, and he was an Olympic bobsledder. Crazy. Okay, I do want to preface this conversation 20 minutes in. I want to preface this conversation letting you know and everybody know that I've never owned, nor do I plan to ever own any Apple product. I don't hate them. I don't love them. I'm agnostic or indifferent to the brand. I just feel that they are a little too hyped up, and I just don't feel that they're for me. They've never felt intuitive to me, and I've always been a PC, Zune, Galaxy kind of guy.
Okay.
So that out of the way, why did you feel the need to write this book?
Well, it was really born out of my coverage of Apple at the Wall Street Journal. It was propelled by curiosity. I mean, two things interested me about Apple when I began covering the company. One was that the company's co-founder died. Obviously, everybody knew that, but I think I failed to appreciate until I began talking to people who worked there, how much the people who worked with Steve Jobs were still grieving years later. And I'd never thought of a company grieving a loss like that, especially if somebody who had a reputation for being a bit tyrannical and kind of a jerk, but he was just beloved. And I thought that it was interesting that this company lost somebody that they cared so much about and then had to figure out how to carry on without him because the entire company was structured around him. So it begged the question, like, how do you do that? How do you push through grieving and make sure that the company survives? And then the other thing was when I started on the company, I met with a local journalist named John Markoff for a cup of coffee. And he recommended that I look into Jony Ive, who's Apple's longtime designer, and ask questions about him and learn more about his career. And in doing so, I pretty quickly learned that this figure who was so instrumental to the products that Apple made had somehow fallen out of love with the company that he'd helped build. And it just piqued my curiosity and it made me want to learn more. And I couldn't help but think about the Talking Heads song, where, this is not my beautiful house, once in a lifetime. And, wanted to know what his once in a lifetime story was.
Did you get a chance to speak with him?
Yeah, I can't go into the sourcing on the book, obviously.
Okay.
I can say that we courted the opinion of people around Jony Ive and Tim Cook, who are the central figures in the book. So those perspectives are certainly reflected in the book.
Got you. This book is fucking amazing. Forgive my language, Tripp's mom.
Yeah, that's going to be a great pull quote. I'll just pop that thing out. This book is fucking amazing, right? So.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Now, I didn't know how good I had it till I met some other whiskeys from the city. It turns out a small town and an even smaller batch made me the most headstrong spirit both sides of the Pecos. Call me Critical Batch, Texas Bourbon. Raised by a sailor in Bulverde, Texas, bottled at 110 proof, they took me out of the barrel and didn't know which end to slap. So why don't you come taste the pure definition of bourbon, grain to barrel to bottle, and join our little rebellion. You may all go to the liquor store. I'll be at Chaplin Distillery, 30790 Blanco Road in Bulverde, Texas. Ask for CB in the tasting room, and I'll see you soon. That was the Bourbon Talking, Streetwalkers. Chaplin Distillery is proudly veteran-owned and operated. Follow them on Instagram and Facebook, or go to chaplindistillery.com. And maybe I'll see you at the tasting room.
Let's get back into it.
I love that at the very beginning, there's a cast of characters explanation, because I can't be the only one who doesn't know who most of these people are. I've never heard the words Jony Ive in my entire life, and yet he is the creative backbone of the biggest company on the planet. So I think it was really cool that you gave us sort of the cast of characters at the beginning and you kind of told us who they were. That was very helpful in trying to figure out what the hell is going on in this book as you're going through the whole book. I think it was great that we got all the backgrounds of these people. We got an amazing background on Jony Ive and on Tim Cook. And one of my favorite parts is that you didn't spend very much time talking about Steve Jobs before he passed. I mean, there was just very little bit that kind of underlined how important he was to the company and why they brought him back, stuff like that. But you didn't really spend a whole lot of time on him because, well, the book is about after him. So that makes sense. At a certain point in the book, which I guess also in real life, Steve Jobs made a decision. He had basically two people to choose from about who was going to lead the company after he passed. And he chose Tim Cook. And this is how stupid I am. I mean, I guess I know in the back of my mind that Tim Cook is the CEO, but as it was leading up, I was like, come on, Johnny, pick Johnny, let's go. But obviously that didn't happen, but I was rooting for the other guy, I guess. But why do you think if design and flawlessness of design were so important to Steve, why do you think that he didn't pick Jony Ive?
One of Steve's unique talents, and the book hits on this in some ways, but maybe not overtly enough, was recognizing the strengths and weaknesses of the lieutenants he had assembled to make Apple what it was. And with Jony Ive, he recognized that Johnny's strength was obsessing over how the corner of an iPhone should be perfectly curved, how many points it should have to make it this minimalist curve that you really don't see often with other products. And not so much in approving expense reports or fretting about a P&L or doing any of the other things that are customary for somebody in management. And so he made sure that during his time working with Johnny had a team of about 20 people that he was responsible for. It was really, really small and really nimble. And they were all obsessives about product in the same way Johnny was. They were all had strong aesthetic sensibilities and were industrial designers. Tim, on the other hand, had built out a large organization to lead Apple's operations and had, by that point, proven to be really a genius in his own right because he had perfected the art of outsourcing in China in many ways before anyone else did. And that became more than half the value of the company. It was not just that they made amazing products. It was that they made amazing products and produced them exactly the same into millions and millions of units. And Tim Cook was behind that. So he recognized Johnny's weakness, not managing people. If he put him in charge of a large organization, it would probably be a disaster. And Tim's strength. Tim had proven that he could be in charge of a large organization. And that was why he was tapped.
I think one of the things that maybe was a weakness for Johnny as well is that from what I can tell from this book, he had absolutely no concerns about money. Not only did he not know what something would cost, he didn't care. As long as it was exactly as beautiful as he wanted it to be, he had no budget. He didn't. That probably would have been a bad thing for a CEO.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah, their profitability would have been dinged a good bit if Jony Ive had been in charge. I mean, I think the other thing that made Tim Cook an appealing and correct choice is that Tim studied this area of engineering that I honestly didn't know a lot about before I came to work on this book, industrial engineering at college. And it's focused on human systems. So it's about figuring out how to take people and get more productivity out of them. And that's really what he needed to do in the wake of Steve Jobs' death, because the whole company was really built around Steve Jobs making decisions. I mean, he was kind of like the final arbiter of everything that they did. And particularly all the creative things they did, because he was making all the software decisions and all the decisions about design and final decisions about design and all the decisions about what advertising would look like. And Tim had to figure out how to take over this company and take it from one that was really an autocracy under Jobs and turn it into one that was collaborative, consensus driven, almost a democracy where all of the lieutenants reached agreement and then proceeded on what they were going to do.
Makes sense. How long did it take you to do all of the research for this book?
It's really a reflection of 4 years of coverage of the company, plus, an intensive 7-month period of reporting and writing. That was doing nothing but work on the book for about 7-month period.
So when you wrote the book, were you still having to go to your day job, or did you take some time off so you could write the book?
The journal is really generous. They provide what's called book leave, essentially sabbatical, to basically step away from your daily task and really immerse yourself in the topic that you're going to be writing about. And if they didn't do that, frankly, there's no way I could have gotten this done. I mean, you really have to, for me, it required giving up like reading the newspaper every day, because that almost was like a distraction from where I needed to be focused. The people that you begin to write about become so top of mind that it's almost like they're sitting in the room beside you as you're working on it.
Wow. Out of curiosity, why did you decide to give real big backstories of the major players like Tim and John, but for the most part, ignore Wozniak? Where's that guy? I mean, you barely talked about him.
Woz, yeah. Yeah, you mentioned that the book picks up after Steve's death, right? I mean, the Steve Jobs and Apple origin stories had really been told elsewhere in other books. There's a great writer named Michael Moritz who told the early story of Apple. He's now a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. I didn't feel the need to retread what he'd done. Walter Isaacson had done a tremendous job of telling the story of how Steve Jobs revived Apple in the 2000s. I didn't feel the need to tell that story either. I felt like this was a story about what it's like to lose somebody and then figure out how to carry on after his death.
Agreed. So does that mean that Wozniak was out of the picture long before?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
He was not even in the picture in the kind of like the 2000s revival period when Jobs came back and resurrected the company and brought it back from the brink of bankruptcy.
See how little I know about Apple? I did not know that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a nugget in the epilogue that I think kind of encapsulates the company's history in a way, because it's really been defined by pairs. So in the 80s, it was Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs. When Jobs returned in the late 90s and 2000s, it was Jobs and Jony Ive who were the key to much of what Apple accomplished. And then over the past decade, it was really Tim Cook and Jony Ive who were at the forefront of what the company was doing. There's a lot of research that's been done on why pairs do better work. I mean, when you see it in Lennon and McCartney, there are ample examples in other areas such as science, art, but that kind of combination was really critical to what Apple's done over the better part of 3 decades.
As I said earlier, I don't have any Apple products, but I'm the only person in my family who doesn't have Apple products. Both of my kids, my wife, they all have Apple stuff. So that means that we have Apple TV in my house. Now, when I got to this point in your book, it was like a little light bulb went off because we were in the middle of watching Ted Lasso, and there's a reporter who pops up all the time, and I can't remember his name, but he says, blah, 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 The Independent.
Trent Krim, right?
Yeah, Trent Krim, The Independent.
Yeah.
Well, you talk about The Independent in this book, but it's not the same Independent. The Independent, I guess, was a newspaper that was in Tim Cook's hometown, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, I did go to Tim Cook's hometown of Robertsdale, Alabama.
Can I assume that that reference in Ted Lasso is just a shout out to Tim Cook?
I don't know. The people behind the Independent in the UK would probably take exception to that. But yeah, generally speaking, maybe in Ted Lasso's mind, I'm sure that's the case. It's the same kind of folksy Independent that he's accustomed, that people are familiar with in Robertsdale.
So again, speaking as a person who clearly doesn't know a whole lot about Apple and hasn't followed and hasn't watched all of the amazing marketing release shows and those types of things. All that I know about Steve Jobs, aside from the fact that he created this wonderful company, is that he was very abrasive to some people that worked for him. I think he didn't wear shoes, and he might have smelled a little bit like he needed a shower. I have no idea if that's true. Neither one of us are going to say that's true because we don't want to get sued. But if that's all that I know about him, why do you think he was so beloved by the company? Like, why did the company, like you said, years after he was gone, why was the company and the employees still just so heartbroken over it?
The things you said are true at various points in time, and both can be true, right? You can smell bad at a certain point in your life and then also be beloved. They're not mutually exclusive things, right? In the case of the people who worked with Jobs, why did they love him so much? It really came down to the fact that they felt like he brought the best out in them and inspired them to do their best work, and also just had remarkable taste. He just had a sensibility that was unparalleled when it came to commercials, and he could tell you what he didn't like in order to get to what he did. And when they got there, it'd be something like the Silhouette advertisement that ran for years, during the iPod heyday. That was just such a memorable spot that they could run that for a long, long time. And eventually he realized that that would be a good way to market the iPod. And the same was true with the decisions that he guided on the iPhone and everything else. He just had a way of bringing out the best in the workers that he worked with. And because he did that, they were willing to work harder than they probably would have been willing to work elsewhere.
That Silhouette campaign, when the iPod first came out, the song, I think it's Are You Gonna Go My Way by Jet or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was such a good marketing campaign that nobody associates that song with the band Jet. Everybody associates that song with the Apple commercial. Like whenever that song comes on, if you're, more than 5 people in the room, somebody will say, oh, hey, this is that song from that commercial. Nobody will say this is Jet. They say this is that song from that commercial. So again, another stroke of genius. This book chronicles the rise of some of the greatest creative and marketing minds in history and their integration into the biggest company in history. Do you think that there will be in your lifetime another set of circumstances where the brilliance and the creativity and the marketing minds coalesce and make another company as big or near as big as Apple? Do you think that'll ever happen again? Because it seemed like just a perfect storm.
It was a perfect storm. The 2000s were a unique period in the history of technology where you had all of a sudden like these breakthroughs where computers had been dominant for years, but things were miniaturized in such a way that you could put 1,000 songs in your pocket. And then around the same time, you could combine those capabilities with the capabilities of a phone. It was a real special period in time. And over the past decade, we've seen that doesn't always happen decade to decade. We've seen kind of a lag in some of the innovation across technology over the past decade. Could we see another company do something radical and transformative and become as big as Apple one day? Yeah, I think absolutely. What if somebody invented flying cars or some way to...
We know who that's going to be. Take it easy.
Who's that? Who's that going to be?
It's going to be Elon. Come on now.
Elon, yes. Or something like that, right? I mean, you can't rule out something like that happening. But the thing about innovation is that you just don't know where it's going to come from. And that's why, there was the famous book called The Innovator's Dilemma, which is kind of a cautionary tale that if you become a big company, you need to be looking over your back shoulder in perpetuity to make sure that nobody is making some new product that's going to disrupt your existing one.
Kind of like Apple and Samsung. They're I guess Apple was kind of like, hey, wait a minute, Galaxy, you can't be doing this stuff. That's cheating.
It's more like Apple and Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft's regained its footing, but if you recall, like in the 2000s when Apple introduced the iPhone, it created a whole new computing paradigm. And Microsoft, which had been dominating computing for decade on decade, was suddenly falling by the wayside and losing sales. And Steve Ballmer gets fired and so on and so forth. It's more like akin to that than Apple Samsung. Apple Samsung have this frenemy relationship where Samsung's been a bit of a copycat, in terms of giving chase to Apple.
Which you can say without any worries because that was decided by a court, right?
Right. Yeah. Giving chase to Apple in terms of introducing a smartphone that was similar in terms of functionality to what Apple offered.
Do you think that chase like that and looking over your shoulder like that, do you think that creates an environment ripe for innovation? Do you think it spurs on innovation?
Yeah, I mean, I think whether you're an individual or a corporation, competition is beneficial in terms of pushing you to do your best work. It certainly was the case with Apple. They were incredibly unnerved by Samsung's ability to match what they were offering in the smartphone world. And as a consequence of what Samsung did in terms of making bigger phones earlier than Apple did, and the book goes into this, like Apple all of a sudden began to slip and lose some of its lock and control on the smartphone market. And its reaction to that was to make big smartphones itself. Those first plus-size smartphones, the iPhone 6, they were a huge boon to Apple's business because they were extremely popular in China. And that became a real turning point for the company. It allowed the company to get over a hump after Steve Jobs' death and really find its footing. And it hasn't really slowed down ever since.
You mentioned in this book that China was a big part of the success of Apple turning into a $2 trillion company. Not only, the labor force, but also when they were able to finally offer the phone there. Huge customer base in China. It's been a couple weeks since I read this book, but there was a manufacturing issue where there was a labor shortage in one plant. And then I want to say that Tim Cook picked up the phone and called a different plant. And then that dude was like, well, first of all, I'm a little miffed that you didn't use me. But second of all, I'll make sure that other plant has enough employees to do your thing. Is that real? Did I get that right?
It's a wild story. So yeah, the book spends a good bit of time talking about the making of the Apple Watch, which is the signature product that Apple has created over the past decade. And as it came time to begin manufacturing that product, Apple chose a smaller manufacturing partner to do it, a smaller supplier outside of Shanghai. And when they went to ramp, it's a verb they use for when they went to run the assembly lines for it, they were 100,000 workers plus short on the assembly lines to make roughly 40 million watches that they wanted to make to ship around the world. And in a moment of desperation, Apple's chief operating officer, Jeff Williams, turned to the head of Foxconn, which is the largest contract manufacturer that Apple relies on, and says, hey, we're in a jam here. Can you help us out, essentially? And the head of Foxconn obviously was a bit perturbed that they didn't get the business at the outset, but did have a huge network in China to pull from to pull together this workforce that they needed in the heat of the moment. And they managed to get it. But it boggles the mind that it's like 100,000 workers, right? Like that's bigger than most decent sized towns in America, right? I mean, they were just able to kind of get those workers on the fly and get the product out.
When I heard that, read that, whatever, I stopped what I was doing and I was like, did this dude just say 100,000 people? Not only was it an alarming number, you don't think about the watch on your hand that it took 100,000 people to make it. Like you definitely don't think that. But then also that dude at Foxconn could just snap his fingers and 100,000 workers would appear. Especially, today Burger King is closing down the street because they can't get 9 people to show up every day. And then over in China, this dude snaps his finger and 100,000 people go work for not even his company. Like what is
right.
That is the weirdest story ever. Wow.
Right. It is. It boggles the mind, no doubt.
So in the book, it was one of the last things I think that Jony Ive worked on. Oh, and just a little side note. I've heard you interviewed several times by other folks. Mm-hmm. And every single one of them said Jony Ive. And I get that because of the way it's spelled. But kudos to you for not correcting a single one of them. You're like, hey, my job is not to correct you. You can look like an idiot if you want to. Every time somebody said it and you didn't correct them, I just laughed. I'm like, that's hilarious.
I figured they'd pick up on it eventually. I mean, there's a funny nugget in the book where Jony Ive's good friend, Stephen Fry, the actor, is roasting him at his birthday party and actually makes fun of him for the unusual spelling of his name, which is Jony, and calls him Jony and just kind of does a little ribbing over the idea that he had this like very bespoke spelling of the name Johnny. It couldn't be, just a pedestrian spelling.
Everything about that dude was bespoke from the moment he was born.
There's certainly truth to that.
There was even one interview where you brought up Johnny and then the dude asked a question about Jony, and then your answer included you saying Johnny like 3 times, and then he had a follow-up question about Jony, and I just could not stop laughing. I'm like, this guy's just not picking up the hints. One of the last things I think that I almost did it. One of the last things I think that Jony worked on before he sort of moonwalked out of the company. I mean, he's not out of the company, but before he sort of moonwalked out of the spotlight was a charity camera, right? For an AIDS charity.
For Red, yeah, which is Bono's charity that does work across Africa, correct? Yeah.
How many cameras were produced?
There was one produced for auction. I believe there were 3 total or something on that order. There were just a couple others, which Jony Ive and Mark Newson, I am told, also have one of them, perhaps.
I would imagine, right?
Yeah.
I can't imagine that Johnny is going to spend all that time and creativity and then not make one for himself, right?
But in essence, it was one camera.
Correct.
They spent an inordinate amount of time making one camera, with the rationale being like, if we make one of these, demand will be so great for it that we can auction it at a premium and really raise money for charity.
As far as I could tell, you did not go into how much it cost to make that camera. So in my mind, as you're describing all of the quirks and the features and the going back and forth and all of the energy and people hours that are spent on this camera, there's no way in hell it could possibly even recoup that money at an auction. And like, how much did this camera cost?
Yeah, I have no idea. It's a great question.
How do you not know that? Like, all this research you did, nobody would tell you? Like, there's no way to find out?
Ultimately, it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, people...
What? Are you crazy? It matters so much.
People volunteer their time for charitable purposes all the time, whether that's in making something, as was done in this case, or, volunteering to just do work and sweat equity on a soup kitchen line, right? I think the essence of that was more about the time that Johnny spent and how he was being pulled in many different directions at the same time. That was my focus versus how much Apple spent on this very bespoke camera that then went on and was done for a charity auction. You have to make choices sometimes when you're reporting on a book. I appreciate why you would want to know that. I mean, in other words, did they make enough off the camera to justify the amount of work?
That part doesn't even really concern me. I just think that whole story of that camera sort of goes to Johnny never considered money. It didn't matter what the budget was. He was going to do whatever. If he had a green light to make something, he was going to make it the best and the prettiest and the most amazing. Budgets be damned.
There's another anecdote in the book that speaks to that, I think, well. When it came time to finalize their marketing plan for the release of the Apple Watch, Johnny had a very clear vision for what he wanted to do with that. He wanted to bring in a lot of people from the fashion world to Apple's unveiling because he wanted the fashion world to accept the watch. Otherwise, he worried that it would be doomed from the outset. I mean, fashion has like this weird way of informing all that we wear and all that we do. And Johnny was attuned to that. So he wanted an experience that rivaled those that you would have at a fashion show. And so Apple was planning to do the event in Cupertino at a community college where they've hosted a number of events over the years. And Johnny proposed setting up a large multi-story white tent outside the venue. The kicker in this is that to put it there, they would have to move nearly 24 trees. And the cost was going to be about $25 million for the entire effort. And Tim Cook signed off on it. Apple moved the trees and they replanted the trees and they put up the tent and everything else. But that, I think, also speaks to the idea of, a lack of concern about costs. I'm sure there were other ways that you could have probably done a very nice event, but he wanted something that was top of the line. And the cost of that event alone was extremely staggering.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
So I ran into previous guest of the show, Chris Gronkowski, the other day, and it went a little something like this.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, Chris. Hey, you know what sucks? When I get done with my workout at the gym, my protein shake's not cold anymore, man. It's room temperature.
Weird. I haven't run into you at the gym lately.
Busted. Okay, truth be told, I don't work out, but I do get thirsty after a long day of podcasting. I just can't seem to keep my cocktails cold.
You should use an ice shaker.
What's an ice shaker?
The ice shaker is a double-wall, vacuum-insulated stainless steel shaker bottle with a patented twist and agitator that breaks up the protein powders.
So you're saying I should switch to an ice shaker, take out the agitator so I can fit more ice in the cup and it'll stay cold longer?
Steve, you don't need more ice. The ice shaker is third-party tested and verified to keep your drink cold for 30-plus hours.
Chris, you're a genius. I'll still remove the patented screw and agitator and just add more booze.
I guess technically you could, but if you actually use the ice shaker as a protein drink cup, the agitator breaks up the powder and doesn't bounce around like you're shaking a paint can.
Why are we still talking? Let's party.
Gronk style!
That's right, Streetwalkers. Ice Shaker is the new sponsor at Fascination Street Podcast. Ice shaker is made from kitchen-grade stainless steel so it doesn't smell all funky after you use it a couple of times like those cheap plastic ones. When I'm out and about doing interviews or partying Gronk style, I use the Fascination Street Podcast Edition 26-ounce Flex Ice Shaker Cup, and it keeps my drink cold until the sun comes up. You saw Ice Shaker on Shark Tank. All 5 sharks made an offer with Mark Cuban and Alex Rodriguez closing the deal. Now you can get a deal too. Order your own 26-ounce Flex Cup right now at iceshaker.com and use the promo code FSP for $5 off your first order. Once again, that's iceshaker.com, promo code FSP, as in Fascination Street Pod, for $5 off your first order. That's iceshaker.com, promo code FSP.
Let's get back into it.
Why did you feel that it was so important to include Tim Cook's struggle to an eventual decision to announce his sexuality to the world? Like, how does that move the story of Apple's rise along? Why is that important to this story?
Because the story is as much about Apple surviving as it is about these two men who have been so critical to the history of business over the past decade. And that's at the heart of Tim's story and his legacy, is this announcement. It came at a moment where the company had been struggling for some time, and they kind of broke through a barrier at that point. They regained their footing. There seemed to be fewer doubts about the company afterwards. And I thought it was revealing that one of Tim Cook's primary concerns in the run-up to that was that he make the announcement from a position of strength so that in the future, he wouldn't set back other LGBTQ executives. It would be bad enough in his mind to be the first CEO after Steve Jobs to fail. It would be far worse to be the first openly gay CEO to fail at a company of that profile and that caliber. He feared that it would set back others who might come out in the future if that were the case. So he timed it at a time where Apple had a lot more sales. They had an explosive year. It was really, really amazing. And that's why it was a point of focus. I think that's going to be something that's part of Tim Cook's legacy. So when we look back in 20, 30 years, that will be a major part of his story and his contribution to business.
So do you think it was kind of like him going, yeah, we did all that, and I'm gay. Mic drop. Was it like that?
I don't think, first of all, Tim Cook's too understated to mic drop anything. That's not really his style, right? He's a very understated, private individual. It was the type of thing that was rumored and known. So it was more of a public acknowledgement of something that had been somewhat discussed within Silicon Valley for some time. And the fashion he did it in was so subtle. He wrote an essay for Bloomberg Businessweek, and he didn't do any interviews. If it were mic drop, I think he would come out and do a bunch of interviews and do some commentary about it and really talk it up. But that was not what he did. It was very subtle, very kind of in line with what he had done historically, which is kind of like a private, somewhat quiet approach to announcing this news that was really seminal at the time in business.
One of the things toward the end of the book that you talk about are the legal issues surrounding the 2015 San Bernardino workplace mass shooting. First of all, that was very riveting and well done. I was particularly mesmerized by the staunch, I guess, defense of the user's privacy in the eyes of Apple, right? Apple is like, look, we have made a promise to our customers that we're going to protect their information, and this sort of oversteps that, so you're going to have to take us to court or whatever. But then, if I understood correctly, customers in China don't really have that same protection. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah. There's some inconsistency between Apple's position in the US and Apple's position in China when it comes to privacy. And that was something in the eyes of the FBI that was a point of frustration throughout this time, because Apple was taking a stand against unlocking these iPhones when the FBI thought it was critical to national security. FBI really believed that Apple would have made more concessions to China had this issue flared up there.
In this book, after I was all the way through it, I still don't know if you're a fan or a hater. Like, you wrote this.
Good.
That's why I'm saying this. You wrote this with such a centralized vision that I really have no idea if you love these people or hate these people. And it doesn't matter. But I think that's integral to good storytelling. There's not a whole lot of, especially nowadays, there's not a whole lot of journalism that is just straight down the line of this is what happened, not what I think about what happened, or, this isn't my spin. Like, you told good things about the company and you told things that make the company look pretty shitty in some situations. So kudos for doing that, because that could not have been easy to take yourself out of this book, out of this story, and your thoughts and opinions out of the story. Like I said, I don't know if you like them or hate them, and I don't want to know, so don't tell me. But I kept thinking the whole time, aren't you worried about the wrath of Apple? I mean, they're one of the most litigious companies on the planet. Like, aren't you afraid?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, you need to be careful whenever you're reporting on anything, whether it's, a big company or an individual, because you have to be sensitive to the public spotlight that you're putting on that person. You need to make sure that the information you're providing the world with is accurate and fair. I guess if Apple had sued me, like, I don't know, would it be like, Phil Mickelson telling Alan Shipnuck that I didn't say that, and then Alan produces the tape or whatever? Sometimes controversy can be good for a book. I think I'd rather not be sued and deal with controversy than have that foisted on me. So I'm thrilled to hear that you found the book balanced and fair. That's probably the most important thing that can be said to a journalist on anything they work on.
I mean, I know that there's organizations that use the terms fair and balanced. This is honestly probably the most fair and balanced. Like I said, you go at them hard and then you tell some really cool stuff about them. This is one of the most balanced books I've ever read. So thank you for that. One more question. And this happened very recently. Recently, a family of a 12-year-old boy filed a lawsuit against Apple. Do you know about this?
No.
Saying that the boy suffered irreversible hearing loss because he was wearing AirPods when an Amber Alert came through, and it caused tinnitus, dizziness, and now he has to wear a hearing aid because it was so loud coming through these AirPods. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I didn't see that. It makes me curious, and I kind of want to see if there are other issues like that that have flared up before. I mean, I could easily wrap my head around it, right?
From what I understand, it's turned into a class action now.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I guess that's the risk that Apple runs now and has run for some time. It's like their products change. They kind of invade and take over our lives, right? We've changed the way we interact with each other because of the smartphone. I mean, there's constant buzzing and picking up the phone and not giving people the same kind of eye contact that we provided in conversation, a couple decades ago. And it's something that Apple's sensitive to, and it's something that has informed some of the decisions of its designers. I mean, they really wrestle with that and they try to figure out ways around that. They don't always get it right. And this is an example of that. I think AirTags is another example of that.
What is that?
AirTags is the small medallion that you can put on your luggage, and it'll tell you where your luggage is if it were lost at, say, the airport or something like that.
Like those tiles used to be?
Yeah, like a tile.
Okay.
It's exactly like a tile.
Okay.
But it's being misused in some instances. Stalkers have slipped it into women's purses. There's a woman, I think there was a report of a woman this week who used it to follow her husband who she thought was having an affair. It's it can be abused. And so constantly as tech makes these giant steps forward, and particularly with Apple, because it has its iPhones and the pockets of a billion plus people, it really has to think through all the permutations and downsides of what it releases before putting it into the world. Sometimes it doesn't always get that right.
Isn't that crazy? When we were kids, you had to jump through a bunch of hoops to get a judge to sign off on a tracking device, and they'd put it under your car or whatever. They geotrack you. And now as a regular citizen, you can just buy one off the shelf. That is crazy. I didn't know that product existed. Well, man, I can't believe we actually went over, and for that, I apologize. Tripp, can you tell everybody where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, at Tripp Mickle on Twitter. So that's 2 P's, Mickle. You can find me there on Twitter. And then beyond that, you can follow my work in the New York Times and find the book at Amazon or at a bookstore near you. I'm sure they'd place an order if they don't have it on the shelf.
Did you just give your Twitter and not your Instagram? Are you on Instagram?
I'm on Instagram, but I use Instagram for personal use. I don't use it for work.
Gotcha. Okay, so
maybe I need to be more thoughtful and progressive in that front, but I don't know. I haven't taken that approach yet.
Gotcha. Well, how about this? I mentioned at the top of the show that I have this unmolested copy of your book. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, it is After Steve, How Apple Became a Trillion-Dollar Company and Lost Its Soul by Tripp Mickle. So how about this? If you enjoyed this episode talking with this wonderful author, Tripp Mickle, retweet the link to this episode and tag Tripp Mickle and Fascination Street Pod. That's at Tripp Mickle, TrippMickle, and at Fascination STPD on Twitter. Retweet that, and I'll pick one person from all of those retweets, and it's not signed, but I will send you this book in the mail. It's an actual real book. There's let's see here, 246 million pages. So yeah, it's a real book.
I think it's 412. Don't scare everybody there, Steve.
Oh yeah. At least mine was a pretend number. Yours is huge. So do that, and I'll send one person this book. Retweet it as much as you want. Enter as often as you like, or whatever they say. Tripp, before I let you go, is there anything we didn't talk about or I didn't ask you about that you wanted to talk about today, man? Did I miss anything?
No, I think we covered some great ground, and I thoroughly enjoyed being on the show. Thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate your time, and I first heard you on the Adam Carolla show, but the way his show is, and I love his show, but I don't feel like there was enough time spent on you in the book, and that's why I wanted to have you on so that we could let this grow a little bit and talk a little bit more about it. So thank you. I appreciate it. And you have a great rest of your week, man.
Thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
You too, man. Take it easy.
We'll see you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Opening music is the song Magnolia from the 2001 album Intransigence, used with permission from Douglas Miles Clark. Closing music is from the song Say My Name off the 2021 album Underdog Anthems, used with permission from Jax Hollow. If you like the show, tell a friend. Subscribe and rate and review the show on iTunes and wherever else you download podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. All the episodes are available there as well. Check me out on Vero at Fascination Street Pod and TikTok at Fascination Street Pod. And again, thanks for listening.